Many people say that it's a logical assumption that home insurance rates should go up after a hurricane. But what about property taxes when the state has to clean up the mess made by your mansion and your boats flushing off into the Gulf of Mexico? Homeowners insurance in Florida keeps doubling and tripling for the residents because of hurricanes. But why don't property taxes go up for people who live on barrier islands when their properties end up in the Gulf of Mexico? Today's video is interesting. They want our homeowners insurance to increase because of hurricanes. Why doesn't their property tax increase because of hurricanes? After all, the state has to spend money to clean up these messes, don't they? And boy, we're talking billions of dollars here, are we not? But the notion of the rich being treated like the rest of us in society is laughable, especially in the state of Florida. When a hurricane trashes the coast of Florida, who should be held accountable and pay for the cleanup of the destruction? If it's the wealthy people who have beach homes on barrier islands who are creating the ecological disaster that we're facing in Florida, wouldn't it make sense to hold them accountable? They want the homeless people to be accountable for their actions. They want the rest of us to be accountable for our actions. But when the rich people's boats and mansions end up in a canal and in the backwaters of Florida, that's when they forget about accountability. On today's video, we're going to talk about the destruction that was caused to the state of Florida by Hurricane Milton and Helene, who is responsible for cleaning up that mess, and why the state of Florida is playing favorites once again, ensuring that the wealthy can get away with destroying our states. If they're the ones who caused this destruction and mess, shouldn't their property taxes go up for living on these barrier islands after a hurricane? After all, it's their stuff in the canal, not ours. On today's video, I'm going to be telling you the truth about Hurricane Milton and Helene that they don't want you to know. And this isn't some stupid clickbait. On today's video, I'm going to be giving you some information that the government doesn't want people to know, at least the state of Florida. The combination of Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene is a more disastrous hurricane even than Hurricane Ian. The reason is because the islands that were most affected by this hurricane are not accessible by vehicle. Some of these islands, like Don Pedro Island, can only be reached by boat. Other islands like Casey Key and Minnesota Key are islands that are so secluded. This is where the wealthiest people in the United States hide out. Nobody is allowed to go into these areas. The debris field from Hurricane Milton and Helene is at least 5 times larger than that of Hurricane Ian on the coastal islands. There are still boats in Fort Myers Beach over 2 years later from Hurricane Ian. However, the debris field from this hurricane along the coastal islands and estuaries is at least 5 times bigger than Hurricane Ian. The cleanup from Boca Grande, Minnesota Key, Casey Key, Don Pedro Island will take much longer than Hurricane Ian. And that is something that the state of Florida cannot afford to say. So what are they doing? They're giving you footage of a stadium in St. Petersburg, Anna Maria Island, and Siesta Key. The 3 places that tourists get to see. Those places are all over the news. They're telling you that the real story is the Tampa Bay area, and that is an area that they can manage to clean up in 6 months to a year to please the tourists and the snowbirds. But the reality is that the actual areas that were most affected by Hurricane Milton and Helene will take over 5 years to clean up. And the debris field is larger than Hurricane Ian. The infrastructure on these islands doesn't exist. The people that live on these islands are absolutely some of the wealthiest and most seclusive people that live in the United States. We know that people like politicians and famous people like Stephen King have houses on some of these islands, but they're not the only elites who hide away along these coastal islands. Take Casey Key, for example. I've lived in the state of Florida for over 20 years. I only recently went there for the first time. Take Don Pedro Island. I've been to 67 counties in Florida. Don Pedro Island is one of the few places I've never been to. These islands are isolated. They don't even have roads, only reached by boat. And the people that live on these islands are people that only the people that live there actually know about. They're very seclusive, secretive places, and they don't want the average person to know that these places even exist. However, we should know that the ecological damage that these two hurricanes combined have done on the state of Florida is something much more massive than Hurricane Ian. And again, that's something the state of Florida just can't afford right now. I've done videos about hate groups in the Deep South, gangs, and many other topics that people on the internet are afraid to talk about. But I tell you honestly that this video you're watching today puts more fear into my heart than any of the other videos I have ever done, because this really is a secret that Florida's government doesn't want to get out. They do not want people to know that it can take at least 5 years to clean up after Hurricane Milton. They're showing you images of Tampa, St. Petersburg, Anna Maria Island, in areas that they know that they can manage and wrap up in 6 months to a year. However, these isolated islands, the home of reclusive, wealthy people and elites, these places will take more than 5 years to rebuild. It is logistically impossible for islands that don't have roads. Other islands like Don Pedro Island, it can only be reached by boat or ferry. Some of these islands don't even allow vehicles. The infrastructure needed to remove all the debris and rebuild these islands isn't going to happen in a shorter time span than Hurricane Ian. It isn't logistically possible. They're showing you the area of Tampa that they know they're able to clean up, but the areas that are actually most affected by this hurricane are areas that are ecologically sensitive and areas that don't have infrastructure. The reason these areas don't have infrastructure is because the people that live on these islands want to be isolated and secluded. The debris field of Hurricane Ian that washed away into Estero Bay Preserve was a debris field that affected 3 or 4 keys: Batista Island, Julie Key, and part of the Estero Preserve area right behind Fort Myers Beach, an area that perhaps may be a few miles long. However, the debris field that washed off of the islands during Hurricane Milton and into keys and islands is at least 5 to 15 times larger than the debris field that Hurricane Ian washed away into Estero Bay Preserve. And we know, if you've been to Fort Myers Beach, that there are still countless boats in the mangroves. These boats can be visible by driving through the road or simply by looking at satellite imagery. 2 years after Hurricane Ian, there are still stranded boats on Fort Myers Beach on many of the keys. The state of Florida wants to promise you that they're going to wrap this whole thing up in just a matter of a few months to a year. However, even to this day, 2 years after Hurricane Ian, the debris field that Hurricane Ian created along Estero Bay Preserve still hasn't got cleaned up. When you look at satellite imagery of Fort Myers Beach, you can still see that the debris field created by Hurricane Ian 2 years ago, basically a graveyard of boats and cars that are still in Estero Bay 2 years later, hasn't been cleaned up. However, the state of Florida doesn't want people to know that the leftovers from Hurricane Ian 2 years later are still there, an embarrassment, because they promised that this would be cleaned up promptly. But now, this hurricane's debris field is about 15 times larger than Hurricane Ian. You can see here they still have boats, just a few of them, working up to clean up cars and boats that are stuck in Estero Bay Preserve. There's even a little area in Bonita Springs, Florida, further south that had a debris field that was cleaned up. This area here was cleaned up because it's adjacent to houses and, well, people can see it. But the issue is that the state of Florida knows that it simply cannot clean these areas. This one here in Bonita Springs was cleaned up as well because, again, hotels, condos, and houses are adjacent from it and they can see it. But the state of Florida hasn't, 2 years later, been able to clean up the mess that Hurricane Ian made in Estero Bay. So how can they clean up the aftermath of Hurricane Milton in a shorter period of time when the debris field is considerably larger? Now, I'm not just saying it's larger. I just showed you the debris field that Hurricane Ian created in Estero Bay. I'm going to show you the debris field that Hurricane Milton created along the entire west coast of Florida. It's clearly larger than Hurricane Ian, but we're only going to focus on a few areas. The truth is that the state of Florida is not going to be able to clean up the aftermath of Hurricane Milton for at least 5 years. I mean, in the case of Hurricane Ian, it just about seems like they quit. There are still entire boats up there in Fort Myers Beach sitting in the mangroves. There are no plans to remove these boats from the mangroves. Hurricane Milton put more debris in even more inaccessible places than Hurricane Ian. So how is the state of Florida going to promise that they're going to clean this hurricane up swiftly when they haven't even cleaned up after Hurricane Ian properly? And that was a storm that didn't create as much garbage as Hurricane Milton. And if you didn't know that Hurricane Milton created a larger debris field than Hurricane Ian, it's because the state of Florida doesn't want you to know that. They've plattered the media with images of that stadium in St. Petersburg. This is what they showed you on the media, on the news. A tarp that blew away on Tropicana Field. Notice that the entire debris field is contained within the stadium. There's no canals or waterways anywhere near the stadium. It's a tarp that's already past its expiration date, and it's a lot cheaper to replace a tarp than it is to build a stadium that's 100% hurricane proof. This was a staging area that the government had. They knew that this tarp was already expired past its date. This was a media distraction. Notice how there's no tarps anywhere outside of this area. There aren't tarps on the floor. There aren't tarps a block away. There aren't tarps outside the stadium. It's all contained within the stadium. And these tarps were designed to fail during a hurricane. These tarps are not meant to stand up to a hurricane. The city of St. Petersburg practically had no damage. A few boats aren't where they're supposed to be, but there aren't like hundreds of sunken boats. Guys, it's a media distraction. Nothing happened in St. Petersburg, but that's what they're showing you on the media. What they don't want to show you is what actually happened during Hurricane Milton, which is what you're about to see now. A debris field larger than Hurricane Ian in areas more difficult to recover than Hurricane Ian, in areas that are more ecologically sensitive than Hurricane Ian, areas that are more likely to get hit by another hurricane, areas that will never be cleaned by the state of Florida. Islands that don't have roads, where the most exclusive wealthy people live, and they don't want cameras there. They don't even want you to know that these islands exist, because this is the retreat of the billionaires, the politicians, and some of the most wealthy people on Earth. This is Don Pedro Island. It is only accessible by boat or ferry, and literally there are no other ways to get supplies on this island. Houses were swept away into the ocean, boats were swept away into the ocean, and this is the destruction on this island. Don Pedro Island, geographically, is about the size of Fort Myers Beach. Population-wise, it isn't. But we're talking about the area that has to be cleaned up. And this is where I want you guys to really pay attention. We're talking about not how many people were affected by this hurricane, but how big the debris field is and the logistics of cleaning up the debris field. In the case of Don Pedro Island, they don't even allow cars on this island. All the infrastructure here has to be brought in by boat, a painstakingly slow process. Now you think about the type of person that lives on an island that doesn't even allow vehicles. These are people that want seclusion, they want privacy, and they don't want to be blasted all over the media. The debris field from Don Pedro Island is elaborate and it's large. But this isn't the only area that was destroyed by Hurricane Milton. There are several places that were destroyed by Hurricane Milton. Hurricane Ian's storm surge affected the coast of North Naples, Bonita Springs, Fort Myers Beach. Other areas had storm surge, but they didn't create a debris field. See, that's the problem. The problem is that Hurricane Milton left a debris field from Boca Grande all the way to Anna Maria Island, and beyond that, over in the Florida Panhandle and the Big Bend region, we know that Cedar Key is completely destroyed. Basically, this is a far greater in size debris field than Hurricane Ian. But let's continue to look at some of these other islands that were affected by Hurricane Milton. Without a doubt, we all gotta scratch our heads and wonder, how will Don Pedro Island be cleaned up and rebuilt when just about everything has to be put on a boat or a ferry to begin with? Minnesota Key is 11 miles long. Fort Myers Beach is only 7. But not all of Fort Myers Beach has boat docks and single-family homes. There's a lot of condos and other uses on Fort Myers Beach. I'm going to have to speed this up dramatically so you guys can understand the scale of the destruction on Minnesota Key. And you can see that there are dozens of adjacent keys that make up Minnesota Key. The word key doesn't mean one island. Actually, several islands can be called a key. Minnesota Key is 11 miles long, most of it covered in boat docks and single-family homes. That isn't the case in Fort Myers Beach, where you have a lot of condos. Basically, the debris field from Minnesota Key alone is larger than the debris field of all of Hurricane Ian, a debris field that 2 years later hasn't been cleaned, let alone the fact that some houses on Minnesota Key have completely been wiped off the map. Literally, the houses don't even exist anymore. It's a much larger scale destruction than Hurricane Ian. The only difference is that with Hurricane Ian, it was a larger urban area, more compact, and it's just made for better aesthetics on the media. Minnesota Key doesn't really aesthetically have that, but it's a more expansive area with a lot more debris that is now sitting in those estuaries, areas that again are larger in size and filled with more garbage than Hurricane Ian. Because of the composition of the zoning of Minnesota Key, you got more boats and more garbage here than you do in Fort Myers Beach. Now, Fort Myers Beach has always had a strict building code, but as you go out of Lee County into Charlotte and Sarasota County, they're more relaxed with their building codes. Thus, you have entire houses made out of wood that were literally just washed away into the back bay, something that didn't happen on Fort Myers Beach with the exception of a few older buildings. In other words, just the fact of engineering itself means that by nature, Fort Myers Beach is a much more sturdy island than, let's say, Minnesota Key, where now you have houses that are made out of wood that have been washed away into the water versus Fort Myers Beach, where the structures were destroyed and they were in a 15-foot storm surge, but the vast majority of them survived. Hurricane Ian was a 15-foot storm surge in some parts of Fort Myers Beach, namely the north side of the island. Hurricane Helene Milton brought a storm surge from Naples all the way to the freaking Florida Panhandle. It was only 4 to 8 feet in some places, a few spots a little higher, but that's not even the point. It's an expansive areas that don't have the same engineering applications when you build a building, areas that create more debris than Hurricane Ian ever did over a much larger area. And again, the question, if 2 years after Hurricane Ian, we still have all those boats sitting there in Estero Bay, what makes you think that this situation is going to be any better? Again, Fort Myers Beach is only 7 miles long. Minnesota Key is 11 miles long. Casey Key, not as much of a debris field as Minnesota Key. Keep in mind, too, that on the other side of Fort Myers Beach, you have the estuaries. You have nothing, practically. It's all preserved lands. But here, there isn't as much preserved land as in that part of Southwest Florida. It's more urban, so by nature, you're just going to have more debris in the water here. But Casey Key is very different than Minnesota Key. Casey Key practically has one single very narrow road that runs the length of the island. Casey Key is 8 miles long, longer than Fort Myers Beach. Of course, it's just one single road, but in many parts, that one single road was completely washed out. And many of the houses on Casey Key were completely washed off the map. They literally fell into the ocean. Casey Key poses a different logistical nightmare. It's not so much a debris field. It's the fact that there's one single narrow road that 2 cars can barely fit on. And they're going to have to accommodate semi-trucks, dump trucks. It's going to be a nightmare bringing all of the vehicles that need to take part in the cleanup effort into an island. Well, simply they don't fit. Moving north of Casey Key, you have the area of the southern tip of Siesta Key. Here you had a lot of destruction and debris. Many of the roads literally got washed away. They look more like rivers and roads. Some of the houses, properties, and roads are now literally almost part of the ocean. Some houses were completely wiped off the map here. This is going to take a long time to clean up. This is the home of celebrities as well, and there's a lot of condos and places where tourists go. There are some debris fields with Siesta Key, but it's minimal. You're talking things that can be easily, from a logistical perspective, managed. Casey Key specific site locations and requirements for Casey Key as far as getting vehicles in and out and sizes and widths and all that means that it's going to be a nightmare for the residents, the homeowners, to fix that island. But then again, it's just a long, skinny island with a lot of wealthy people, so it's not like it directly affects anybody, but it does take up a good 8 miles of shoreline that is completely trashed. Casey Key is longer than Fort Myers Beach, and there has to be some type of ecological cleanup effort after a hurricane like this in an area longer than Fort Myers Beach. Question mark. Is the state of Florida even going to embark on this journey? They may not. We have, as a sad example, the Florida Keys. The Florida Keys used to be a beautiful place. Anybody who does diving here will literally cry when they tell you the stories of what Key West and the Florida Keys used to be, rather the landfill that it is today. The state of Florida let the Florida Keys turn into a coastal landfill. What makes you think that Casey Key and Longboat Key aren't going to become the same landfill that the Florida Keys are? I don't think people realize how bad the homeless, debris dumping, and just the filth that today exists in the Florida Keys. It literally looks like a coastal landfill abandoned boats, garbage, dumping, even people throwing cans of paints, propane tanks, chemicals, gas cans. This is what the Florida Keys looks like today, a floating homeless camp landfill wrapped all the way around the Florida Keys. And this is possibly what the coast of Western Florida is going to become as well. If they haven't cleaned up the mess on Key West, which is even more ecologically sensitive, what makes you think they're going to clean up the mess here? The Florida Keys became a landfill. The coast of Fort Myers became a landfill. What makes you think that Charlotte and Sarasota County aren't going to also become a coastal landfill? The state of Florida doesn't care about the environment. If you think that the state of Florida is going to spend billions and billions of dollars cleaning up the coastline of Southwest Florida after these hurricanes, as Dave Chappelle would say, you have smoked yourself. The R word that is not allowed to be said on YouTube anymore for some reason. Southwest Florida, you're just another landfill. Just like the Florida Keys is a landfill, just like all the homeless camps are a landfill, just like the coast of Fort Myers and Estero Bay became a landfill, this is the next landfill, Florida. The state of Florida has become an open landfill along our coastlines. The footage you're looking at now is in the area of Key West. Not even tourism is a deterrent for the state of Florida to continue this crap. They continue to turn Florida into a landfill. The billions of dollars that it would cost to clean up the mess along our coastline of abandoned boats and debris, it isn't being budgeted for. It isn't being targeted. You could look at Florida 10, 15 years ago, and it was a pristine wonderland. The state of Florida has become a landfill. Homeless camps, abandoned boats, debris, all this crap, and the state does not care to clean it. Our coastlines in Florida are an embarrassment. There's nothing else in the United States that comes close to this. Not even Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana have this much garbage along their coast. Our coasts are ruined. And again, for the people that live in Sarasota and Charlotte County, if they haven't cleaned up the Keys, what makes you think that we're more important than the Florida Keys? It's sad what the state of Florida has become, and I don't think the people here in these counties up here who've never experienced a hurricane understand that a lot of this stuff is just going to get pushed underneath the rug. They're not going to clean it. I haven't really devoted too much time to covering this topic on my YouTube channel because I don't have a freaking boat, but most of these little coastal keys are landfills. There's one called Astoria Island on the northwest side of Key West. The whole thing is a homeless camp. Here in Bradenton, Florida, Sarasota area, a lot of these islands are homeless camps. Around the Daytona area, there's a bunch. Literally Tampa Bay as well. You've seen the Dan guy that's going around the news now. He lives on a boat. I mean, the amount of homelessness on the outskirts and the mangroves, and these people, they throw their garbage in the water. They're living homeless. You think they're going to take the garbage somewhere else? Get out of here. I mean, once their boats are trashed, they just abandon them and leave them there as debris. This is the reality of Florida right now. And believe me, the homeless coastal situation, people living on boats and islands in Florida, it's absolutely huge. I just can't spend $1,000 to make a YouTube video renting a boat or paying somebody to go with me. It just isn't worth the hassle. But there is a story on the internet you can look up about an island over there by Titusville and Daytona Beach. They absolutely trashed an entire island, built forts, and were attacking people who were just kind of enjoying nature. They didn't know that these islands were homeless camps. So when you show up thinking it's a natural area, but it's actually a homeless camp, you get attacked by the people there. What a nightmare. Anyways, I don't have enough time on my YouTube channel to devote some time to what's happening on our keys and mangroves right now, but it's horrific. Let me just show you guys a few examples throughout the state. This is Key West. Here's the southernmost point in the United States. On the northwest side of Key West, there's an entire island, an entire key that has become an open landfill homeless camp. And sadly, it's not just this key. Many of the keys in the Florida Keys, people live in abandoned boats on islands. They fish, they eat anything. They don't follow the rules and regulations of Florida wildlife. They're just out there eating whatever they want, leaving garbage on these islands in the Keys. Then there's this island here in Bradenton, Florida that's been completely trashed by homeless people on boats. With the governor's new homeless laws, we're also starting to see homeless camps pop up in the mangroves here in Bradenton, so most of the mangroves are getting trashed right now. Then there's this beauty on Daytona Beach. Nice little island, you can almost kayak to it, but don't catch yourself on this island. It's been overtaken by homeless people who've made forts, put up no trespassing signs. So if you've ever been in Port Orange near Daytona, you might have seen this thing. Now, back in 2019, when they took this Google image, you could see there were no homeless camps on the island. But today, it's been overtaken by homeless who built even structures on the island. The counties come out to condemn the structures. So we have a problem in the state of Florida that most of our beautiful, pristine areas are being taken over by homeless people who are leaving garbage everywhere. And with these new homeless laws that are coming to Florida, it just encourages the homeless people to be even more paranoid and hide in even further places. I mean, with the tyrannical laws that are being created around homelessness in Florida, it's understandable that the homeless are going to hide on islands on the mangroves because, well, crap, where else can they go? By the way, they're getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. It's dangerous. They get infections. And if there's a storm surge, well, they drown. So it's not like it's ideal for them. The state of Florida doesn't offer these people mental help or homeless shelters or anything. The only thing they get is persecution. But it goes beyond the areas we just covered. Fort Myers Beach got hit again. They had storm surge in Fort Myers Beach. Then you got the Bradenton area, the Sarasota area, the Tampa Bay area, the St. Petersburg area. All these areas had destruction. And, you know, they're under a lot of pressure to make people believe that they're going to clean this up in record time. But they're going to clean up that stadium, and once they put that new tarp on that stadium, they're going to put that on the news and say, well, we cleaned up Hurricane Milton, the stadium has a new tarp. No, that's not the reality. The reality is that these two hurricanes have rendered the entire west coast of Florida into a landfill of boats and debris in the water that is questionable whether it's going to get picked up, since we're still seeing Fort Myers Beach, all the debris from Hurricane Ian. After Hurricane Ian, homelessness in the Fort Myers metropolitan area increased dramatically, and we can expect that this area will see a lot of homelessness too, because Fort Myers is kind of offset from the islands, but a lot of the areas like Bradenton, Englewood, Sarasota, they're very adjacent to the coast, and a lot of people who lost their homes, their mobile homes had their roofs blown off. I mean, the Bradenton area has more mobile homes than anywhere in Florida. We can assume that places like Bradenton, Sarasota, Englewood, and the list goes on, including the entire Tampa Bay area, are areas that are going to see a lot more homelessness in the coming months because of the hurricane. Thus, we can expect, again, just like what happened in Fort Myers, an increase in homelessness because of the hurricanes. And that equals more homeless camps, more garbage, more debris, and an ever-increasing destruction of what's left in the state of Florida. And then the general view of homelessness is changing rapidly. When people lose their homes, people they know become homeless. People are not going to have a tyrannical view of homeless people the way the state wants people to have, because the people that become homeless are going to be people that were just like me and you, but lost their homes during the hurricane. People are sympathetic for those people, and they're going to allow the homelessness to take hold in western Florida. All this is bad news for the state, and the only thing that really matters, of course, is Clearwater Beach, Siesta Key, and Maria Island, the areas that the tourists are going to see. Now, while there's a lot of snowbirding in Charlotte and southern Sarasota County, there really isn't that much tourism. The tourists aren't going to see these places. Now, Fort Myers Beach is a tourist area. There's 700,000 people in Lee County. They got to clean that crap up because, again, it's a tourist area. They don't have a choice. They had to clean up Fort Myers Beach after Hurricane Ian, and even then they still left 50 or 100 boats out there in the mangroves. But, you know, aesthetically, they have to make it look like nothing happened to some type of degree, because the tourists see it. So we can expect Clearwater, Anna Maria Island, Siesta Key, these places the tourists see. Oh, they're going to go in there and do everything quickly because the tourists see that that's where the money comes. But the rest of that coastline further south of us that really got hit by Hurricane Milton, that the news didn't cover, people don't even know these places got hit by Hurricane Ian, yeah, you're not on the top of the priority list. And by the way, Fort Myers Beach got destroyed by Hurricane Helene and Milton as well. This is the new Margaritaville that just opened up in Fort Myers Beach. Guys, I didn't even get a chance to stay here yet. We were planning to stay here, and it's already destroyed. Look, all their palm trees fell. Their pool is trash. There's debris in their pool. And yeah, Fort Myers Beach is at it again. It's not as bad as Hurricane Ian, but don't get me wrong. Fort Myers Beach had a lot of destruction again. So we're talking about the fact that Hurricane Helene and Milton overlapped what Hurricane Ian did. Of course, it wasn't as bad. But again, just a good old reminder that the boats from Hurricane Ian are still sitting in the mangroves in Fort Myers Beach 2 years later. Giant freaking boats. I mean, there's one boat over there you can see from Pine Island Road. It's a monstrosity of a boat, and it's still sitting there. So what makes you think, again, the rest of Western Florida, that if 2 years after Hurricane Ian, that stuff's still there, that it isn't going to happen? It's not, guys. And I'm sorry to tell you, the state of Florida just doesn't care about crap like this. 2 years after Hurricane Ian, these boats are still there. And Hurricane Milton and Helene, the state of Florida in 6 months, once they put that tarp back on the St. Petersburg Tropicana field, they're going to say the battle's been won and the state of Florida's been saved from the aftermath. But let me tell you, the people of the western coast of Florida, that this is going to be a persistent problem for our area. It's going to create the red tide. It's going to just destroy our ability to enjoy the waterways. And again, the state does not have a comprehensive plan to clean up these areas after disasters like this. They clean up what they can while the cameras are there. Once the cameras leave, well, here we are. Go on Google Maps and look at all the boats that are still stranded in Estero Bay, and look at the ones that are stranded now. You can actually go to the government's website, NOAA/Milton Hurricane Satellite Imagery, and you can just explore all the areas that were destroyed. Now, we haven't even got into, of course, Cedar Key. The destruction there is massive, and Stanahatchee, a few other towns up that way by the Big Bend, completely destroyed. But just for us here in Western Florida, it's a lot worse than Hurricane Ian. And perhaps it isn't as cinematic as Hurricane Ian, but if you live in this coast, just understand that our waterways are much more trashed than Hurricane Ian. Fort Myers Beach is a small, compact area, and it has a lot of tourism. They cleaned that up promptly. But for the regular people in the backwater, Englewood, all our areas here in Charlotte and Sarasota County, we're not a priority. The tourists are a priority, and they don't go to your little part of the state. They're up here in Anna Maria Island, and they've already cleaned that up. They're claiming victory already. So that's the reality of the state of Florida. Hurricane Milton and Helene combination has left the state in a much worse state than Hurricane Ian. It's not as compact. It's spread out over a larger area, and the volume of garbage is a lot greater. It's just spread thinly along a coastline, and in a coastline that isn't a priority, a coastline that is inaccessible, islands that don't have a lot of infrastructure, this isn't going to be resolved faster than Hurricane Ian. But the victory about this hurricane will be proclaimed in a few months when Anna Maria Island and St. Petersburg Beach go back to normal. And don't forget that stadium. That stadium is going to be what's going to save Florida. A lot of these islands are already trashed even before this hurricane with the homeless situation. It's not going to get better. It's only getting worse. That's reality. And if anybody believes that the state of Florida is going to spend billions of dollars to clean this up, I don't think so. You know who should be cleaning this up? Who should be cleaning this up? Who should be paying to clean this up? The rich people who have houses on the water. You may be surprised to know that the insurance rates for vehicles and houses along the coast. Fort Myers Beach didn't go up for those people. It went up for the people 20 miles inland on Lehigh Acres. Did you know that if you live on Fort Myers Beach, Florida, your car insurance rates are lower than somebody living in Lehigh Acres? Yes, I had a friend. He had the same vehicles I did, same age. He lived on Fort Myers Beach. He was paying $170 for auto insurance. Living in the same county, far inland, where my vehicles would never get flooded like his did. He had two cars that were completely gone during the hurricane. I was paying $530 for two vehicles in the same county. See, the problem with Florida is that the rich people are the ones that are destroying the state, but the poor people are the ones that are paying the price. If we're going to be fair about who should pay to clean up this mess, the people who have these houses on these islands, their taxes should quadruple. And they should pay to clean up all this crap. But it won't, because the people who make the rules are the people who own those houses. In reality, instead of all of Florida's homeowners insurance is rising, what needs to be rising is the taxes for the people that have properties on these islands. And please believe they can afford it. They moved to Florida for tax incentives. The state of Florida attracts these people because it's a tax incentive state. But in reality, it's them that are destroying our state by building houses on barrier islands. And when those barrier islands get trashed, why don't their property taxes go up? Why don't they pay to clean up the mess they made? The people in Lehigh Acres didn't contaminate anything. The people in Lakewood Ranch didn't contaminate anything. Who contaminated our entire coastline? Is it not the rich people who can afford these houses on barrier islands? These aren't their primary homes. These are second, third, fourth, fifth homes. Some of these people have portfolios of properties. They own 50 to 100 properties. So why are we, the poor people of Florida, stuck with an ecological destruction that the rich people created because they want to have a beachfront property? You want to have a beachfront property and it gets swept all in the ocean and then it becomes the state's problem or the state's people? Nah, bro. You want to have this house on a little barrier island that costs $10 million. Well, when all this crap goes into the water, you're the one who put that garbage there. You're the one who has to pay to clean it up. Now let a poor person leave some garbage outside of their house. Let a homeless person leave a little bit of garbage in the woods, and they become tyrannical against us. I mean, the logical assumption is if it's the rich people with their fancy beach houses that are trashing our state, shouldn't they be the ones to pay to clean it up? Why should we all have to pick up the bill for them? They certainly don't have problems acquiring several beach houses, so why should they have a trouble paying to clean up the mess that they created? But then again, in the state of Florida, the rich people can trash the entire state with their little fancy fifth summer homes or whatever, or winter homes, and the rest of us are stuck paying the bill. Our state's destroyed. They're not going to pay the bill because the people there are being insensitized to come to Florida, and we, the poor people, are paying the price for the rich people destroying our state. See, that's the thing about this situation. The thing about this situation is it's the people on the barrier islands, they're the ones who should be paying for this. Why should we have to pay for them trashing our state? Isn't that a logical assumption? Am I wrong to assume that, or is there something flawed with my thinking here? Am I wrong for thinking that the people who caused the destruction should pay for it? That's the way they look at the homeless people. That's the way they look at everybody else in society. But when it comes to them, no accountability. Accountability for the homeless, accountability for the rest of us in society. But for the rich people who have beach homes, no accountability. No, it's not their problem. It is their problem. They're the ones who need to pay for it.